We ended last week with in the 11th song, in the 5th stanza. In this, the song, which is, as I told you last week, I think the titles of the specific songs and the songs themselves don't seem to really have much connection. But the 5th stanza goes, I am one with you, constantly immersed in worshiping you. Since I'm like this all the time, why can I not realize it naturally even when I'm dreaming? And of course, the answer to that is two-tiered. One is because the mind is the seed essence of all suffering. And secondly, because the mind, in its suffering state, seeks to remedy its suffering through the external rotation, the looking outward from itself to the experience of some other as a solution. And we are constantly, and especially in our culture, we constantly think of anything that pains us as a problem. And we have so many different levels of conditioning. We are conditioned to think of painful experiences or discomfort or anything like that as a problem. And we are also constantly being informed, basically propagandized, that problems have solutions. And we need merely to find the solution and our pain will be done. And so searching for the solution, we develop some desire arises that is also a feature of our socialization and culturalization that propels us into the world in search of a solution which is never in the world, and we are seeking the solutions which don't exist to problems which are not. Because in many ways, physical pain can indicate a problem, but where is health? Where is health? Health is within us. Health is not outside us. Health isn't in a pill or in a doctor's office. No, health is within us. And maybe someone can guide you to something which will activate your own healing resource. But health exists within us. So desire then becomes the mechanism by which, this whole anatomy of desire, thinking of things as problems, looking for solutions outside ourselves, this entire situation, based in mind is, the source of our constant discontent. And the moving about from one thing to another. This will solve my problem, that will solve my problem. The problem is that we're human beings. And from the perspective of cosmic mind, that's not a problem at all. Those who've gotten just a whiff of the fragrance, however slight, of your lotus feet, to them, all things of enjoyment, even those much desired by the gods, appear putrid. Because, and this is something I am sure all of you have experienced, because in those moments when your heart is truly open and the breath of life that expands into the space of your open heart moves through you in ways that penetrate all your boundaries, and it is as though time stands still and physical and energetic boundaries dissipate, and a connectedness emerges and is experienced that informs us, in a profoundly deep, intuitive way, that we are connected with everything, and that is perfect and complete in ways that are beyond possibility of conceiving, beyond any conception. And however briefly this profoundly beautiful experience is engaged, it is an experience that transforms us forever. And, that experience is really the reason why we're all here, because in some form or another, we have had that experience, and knowing, well, even if it's not in our mind, our body knows that experience, and our body is, on its own, calls forth to, the cosmic mind of Shiva, which he's calling Shiva here, the cosmic mind, calls forth to the cosmic mind to inform us the pathway, to reveal the pathway that allows us again and again and again that state, that experience, until all of our distress is dissolved as we are settled, into the natural, easy experience of our total unity in everything. An experience which there is no acquisition that can possibly provide us with that experience. Therefore, enjoyments much desired by the gods appear putrid. It isn't the case that there is one thing in your heart, another in your speech, and yet another in your action. Be clear, O Shambhu. Bestow either grace or punishment. Eek! Bestow grace. Skip the punishment. I am confused and overcome with sorrow. Old age and infirmity terrify me. My strength gone, I come to you for shelter. Therefore grant, O Shambhu, that before long the highest of all states be reached by me, far beyond the path of pain. This sutra begins a discussion which goes on for the rest of the poem. So I'll read it and then we'll talk about it a little more. Therefore, grant, O Shambhu, that before long the highest of all states be reached by me, far beyond the path of pain. When they reach your ears, my laments, however meager, become precious, like the drops of rain that one by one, falling in the core of the bamboo shoot, become pearls. What, O Lord, is not attained by those people who even for a moment pretend to be devoted to your name? O bearer of the crescent moon on your head, allow that vanquishing death I may attain anima and all the other powers. O Shambhu, O Sarva, bearer of the crescent moon on your head, O Shiva, O three-eyed one, bearer of the prayer beads, O venerable one having horrifying skulls as your symbol, O brilliant one having a fearsome trident as your weapon, O ocean of compassion, O ferocious power, creator of the three worlds, O Sri Kanta, quickly annihilate all of this inauspiciousness and bestow upon me the highest perfection. What, O Master, could exist whose creator is not the Lord? What does a sentient being experience that is not due to the great immutable powers of Shankara? I ever abide in you, but even so I am constantly depressed and struggling with mental agonies. O granter of boons, here in this world, inevitable are pain, old age, and death. But leaving these aside for a moment, even the highly esteemed sound itself, and that would be the Om sound, which if you quiet yourself for a moment, you can sort of hear. Even the highly esteemed sound itself and all and other such things are ephemeral. Even so, I long for everlasting happiness, for the enduring, eternal elixir of life, the sweet meditation on your lotus feet. O Master, expert at vanquishing the miseries of devotees, treasury of auspiciousness having matted locks, now, when I am in the abode only of pain, grant me the highest perfection of your worship while I'm still living and fit for the sweetness of pleasures. May he be glorified whose eternal activity is the destruction of the great veil of illusion, whose symbol is the moon, whose light outshines all other lights. The interplay for Utpaladeva between the immediacy of our this moment in our everyday lives, set, in the circumstance of infinity, is kind of, it represents the great challenge for human beings, which is to have the short term and the small picture and the big picture firmly in our vision, and to be able to hold equally the contrast between the two. The reason why I put the Jain statue right there outside the door and then had the trees trimmed the way they are is to perfectly frame that challenge for us as human beings to maintain the awareness of a big picture, even as we are focused very clearly, on the momentary picture that's immediately in front of us. Because this is maintaining our perspective is everything. Remember, if there is only one thing, there is only one, ultimately, one pure awareness, then enlightenment itself is actually a matter of perspective. Because there are not two. So then it's how you see the one. And because of that, in the face of old age and infirmities, it's necessary for us to remember the true source of our life and the enduring nature of the display that is endlessly rolling itself out in, for our senses. And so we have the challenge of our physical existence and all the struggles that we, each of us have to face, and life here described as a path of, individual life described as a path of pain, because in a real way it is. It's simply a path of pain. Utpaladeva evokes, visions of images of Shiva. And this evocation is something that for us today is a little bit odd. Skull bearers and trident bearers and crescent moon wearers. And this has sort of been, for me, it has these images and this symbolism has kind of pulled me back into India over and over and over again, and to consider and to reconsider the historical context of human experience. Because why is it that people might wear, skulls and skull malas? Where did the Karpalikas and the Pashupatas and the Lingayas, where did all of these various forms of spiritual practice come from? And why, have they, because they endured for a very long time. There aren't many Karpalikas around anymore that I'm aware of. And their descendants are the Nathagoris, and there are many of those. Not hard to find Nathagoris. Why do these people exist? And that's because, first of all, life was quite different in the days when this was written, and there were, and it was a lot more, in so many ways, it was a lot more dangerous. Moving from one place to another was not as simple as getting on your pony or going out for, and walking, say, from here to Port Orford or Portland. You traveled through, mountains and forests and across rivers in which there were very few bridges and, not nice roads. And these not nice roads were very often inhabited by people who were completely intent on, killing you and stealing your, or at least stealing your stuff, if not killing you. Death was quite a bit closer to people in traditional times than it is with us today. Still, trauma is ever present. And one of the things that this particular poem brings up for me is the relentless experience of trauma that each of us as a human being is overlaid by, and the ways in which the trauma that we have been overlaid by provokes reaction from us when we are stimulated that has absolutely nothing to do with the source of the stimulation that we are reacting to. And the ways in which, because of trauma, each of us uniquely sees the world in completely imaginary fashion. And that is not to disrespect people who are suffering from trauma. It is to say that, one person is injured, heals in some way, but the trauma endures in the tissue. Then another stimulus comes along which provokes that tissue and it reacts in ways which are appropriate to the original trauma, but not the current stimulus. And so we are constantly imagining threats which have nothing to do with anything in our current moment, and constantly reliving and reacting and re-expressing the tensions that have been installed with us, in us, first of all, from our parents, and secondly, experience through the veils of that ancestral trauma, we accumulate new trauma and end up with an understanding of this world that has absolutely nothing to do with and human beings, that has nothing to do with anything. We see threats everywhere because our mind is a threat recognition mechanism. Our mind evolved to warn us of threats, and our mind will always see a snake coiled on the ground when, at first, until it focuses directly and understands that that coiled snake is actually a rope. And our mind will always, be reacting on every level. Some levels we're not even aware of. Our mind will, because this whole nervous system is a perceptual mechanism, we will be responding to things which have no reality whatsoever. And in that process, we craft a shell very much like a mollusk. We're all crafting shells. We are crafting a shell. When it starts? It starts when we say to ourselves, I'm not going to let myself ever be hurt again. We say that to ourselves, and from that moment on, we are excreting a shell around our heart and a shell around our mind that denies us the possibility of participating in that exquisite moment of complete contact, alignment, and flow that is available to us and every human being when we see through the trauma and the perpetual renewal of that shell into its source, which is the breath of life itself within us, which is not ever separate from Shambhu. This mind, our mind, is constantly pulling us and tugging at us, drawing our awareness away from our source in reaction to all the different, trauma, all the different stimulus that we experience in this environment, and crafting a message to us about all this different stimulus that is fear-based and reactive. That threat recognition mechanism between our ears is constantly encouraging us to be afraid. So, no, I don't think young people are less afraid today. I think they're more afraid. That's my experience. As long as human beings have existed, there's an infinite number of things to be afraid of. It just so happens that we are better informed of all the infinite things that we have to be afraid of, thanks to the existence of a bunch of people who have made it their job to, or who have been given the job, in a case, of making us very afraid and unhealthy. In ancient times, there were many battles and many dangers constantly being faced by anybody who had any bravery. And the encounter with those circumstances and the trauma that everybody accumulates, and I don't care how strong you are, how brave, how powerful, what kind of warrior, every one of those experiences is traumatic. The shell that we build up and the desire that shell gives rise to, as we seek in some fashion to find some solace, some sweetness to put an end to, or at least to relieve momentarily the suffering that we experience, both in a small personal sense and also in an existential sense, is in fact a response to a circumstance that is purely imaginary, this world. And this response only exists as part of a dynamic system which is intended to perpetuate that whole illusion. One of the ways you can think about that is, a lot of times we see people who have serious trauma, who respond to that trauma with drugs or alcohol, and other things. Tobacco is one. And to manage the pain and the anxiety, people will self-medicate. But as the self-medication wears off, the pain and the anxiety comes back, and there is a need to medicate again. And that goes on until the absence of the medication itself becomes a source of anxiety and pain. And there is a whole self-perpetuating program that facilitates the emergence of a story, which is, and all of the layers of this whole process are completely fictitious. And driving our attention away from the healing that is ever present within us. One of the things it does is even, causes us to deny that we need healing, because we are projecting all of this story onto the world around us. So we deny and deny and deny and deny, and we resent the implication, and we resist, and we are angered and enraged by the mere thought of what is really a fabrication of, our own trauma-based fear-based mind. And over and over and over again, Utpaladeva is saying to us, in this and in all of the sutras, to reestablish our own minds in connection with the mind of the source of creation itself, to reestablish contact, alignment, and flow between our mind and our source as the means to dissolve all the trauma and the illusion and establish ourselves in the completely natural, perfect experience of that contact, alignment, and flow gives rise to. And it is in this experience of the ultimate perspective that all power comes to any person. Because looking at the spider web of illusionary creation and realizing that it's simply a spider web, we cut through it with, not even with a big effort, with one little finger, we can take it away. And the veil of that delusion is dissolved. There's lots of things to be afraid of, and none of it is real. And established firmly in our own center, and making the effort every day to open our hearts and align ourselves with the source of life itself, our trauma and distress is dissolved, and we are standing firmly in an unshakable and profound perspective, which is, characterized by a great sense of relief. It's important for each of us to recognize our own trauma. Not that you have to be able to itemize all the experiences. Who gives a shit, Everybody has it. Everybody. It's necessary for us to acknowledge that and understand that so many of our attitudes and our opinions are a function of the trauma within us, not our contact with the truth. This trauma is a trauma that's not our fault. Most of it is what we inherited from our parents, and it wasn't their fault because they inherited it from their parents, etc., 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 until back to the beginning of time. The fault of climate change. But we still have to acknowledge it and understand that our hearts closing and our minds closing and the fear that overcomes us and the revulsion and the rejection, that overcomes us, it has nothing to do with anything except that veil of trauma which is constantly provoking us into a state of fear. But practicing contact, alignment, and flow, meaning taking responsibility for the condition of our own hearts, opening our hearts every day, and dealing with, as another aside, I will say, anger is the stupidest and most useless emotion anybody could ever be engaged with. Anger is just fucking stupid. It's useless. It is entirely destructive and completely reactionary and has, and never did anything good for anybody. You don't need anger to recognize a circumstance where you should not be. You need a good pair of shoes. You don't need anger. And there is nothing positive that anger ever brought to anybody's life. And so taking the energy of anger and bringing it to a deeper place inside us where it begins to shake the shell of our opinions and our attitudes and our ego clinging, to free us from fear and facilitate the emergence of a completely new perspective within us, is part of the responsibility that we have to take upon ourselves in working to begin to find an alignment between the deepest part of our inner heart and, this cosmic mind that we are constantly swimming in. Utpaladeva's background as the preeminent expositor of the Pratyabhijna system of philosophy can very simply, is where he's coming from, and it can very simply be said that, due to the vibrancy, which is also, the turbulence, the respiratory process, the livingness of the entire universe, swirls are formed which become, or spirals are formed, which become mind, which becomes body. All of this cosmic process, due to its own dynamic, crystallizes itself into all of this multiplicity of form. And making the effort within ourselves, we can liberate ourselves from fear and anger and frustration and tension, and become within ourselves a source of, this source of light that is discussed at the end of this poem, and, step into a dimension which is beyond the path of pain, which is beyond sickness and old age and death. Taking this energy of anger and frustration and, of disconnect, and bringing it deeply within ourselves and focusing it on, with our wish to grow, on the potential that is present within each of us as a human being. We cut through the need to have any kind of engagement with the many grievous experiences and humiliations that we have been forced to endure, to become centered within ourselves and clear about facing this present moment as completely available and open as we possibly can face it. So bringing all of that anger into grief, and grief into your core, we can dissolve it and transcend it, and not only that, Utpaladeva here is telling us that over and over and over again, that it is devotion that is the mechanism by which this centering and transcendence is available to us. Now, it's equally possible, because everything has another perspective, that we can take devotion, and this is probably the most preeminent form of devotion. The preeminent use of devotion is as avoidance of the work that we need to do within ourselves to bring ourselves into that state of alignment and clarity. So, we just space out. In devotion. And I can think of worse ways to deal with the grief and anger that you experience. So I got no problem with that. But it is my contention that if you endure in devotion for long enough that you can get through even a small amount of the grief that you are and trauma that you are blessed with, you will begin to see and experience the power of that devotion as a transformative tool, and you will be naturally, without any effort, too much effort on your own part. There's always effort, but you'll be drawn into the appropriate path. And, this is a path that is embodied in every religion up to and until you get to the place where the doctrine and the dogma begin to differentiate yourself from other. What our devotion should lead us to is an appreciation of the reality that it is our own awareness, the awareness that we are, that is the source of the awareness of all other, and all subjects and objects are grounded in the one pure awareness that is the breath of life itself. Awareness and the breath of life are one, two different perspectives. Just like Shiva and Parvati, or Shiva and Shakti, or Chakrasamvara and Vajra Yogini, just like, earth and sky, just like sun and moon, just like day and night, light and dark, all rest in the same field. It always engages mind and emotion, but it's taking that engagement and instead of projecting it to this thing or that thing or another thing, it is expanding our mind and our emotion to encompass the this thing and the that thing and other things in an effort which is to take us beyond all things and into the depth of our own source. Here we are not working for a car or a refrigerator or a table. We are working for a perspective. We are making an effort toward a perspective that will unify body, mind, and spirit in the recognition that all of it is of one flavor, one taste. And so we're not, going hither and yon, here, there, constantly going out, back, moving around, being, lost and found and lost and found. We are centered in a devotional effort which day by day by day by day is transforming us and our perspective and our capacity to appreciate the underlying sweetness of this extraordinarily painful and traumatic and grievous experience that we call life. Utpaladeva he's not goofy. He's not just telling you bliss, 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 bliss. He's saying, I'm constantly depressed and struggling with mental agonies, and he's constantly praying for release from this world and the path of pain into the highest of all possible states. The highest of all possible states is total union with Shiva, in which case there is no longer the possibility of a physical body. The 12th song, particulars of the arcane lore. Everything is saturated with you alone. Why? When this is the case, O Lord, do you not reveal yourself even now? This represents the perspective of the small mind. Because in fact, the Lord is revealed even now, and there is only the Lord in every case, and nothing else. When you understand that every object of your perception, when you look at something, like when you look at me, I'm the object of your perception, right? Every object that you perceive is also a perceiving subject. And you can say, wait a minute, well, what about the carpet or the table? I mean, for me, I define consciousness as the capacity for adaptation, in which case the emergence of everything, like subatomic particles adapt. Larger subatomic particles are adaptations. Atoms are adaptations. Molecules are adaptations. From that most fundamental basic adaptation, all other adaptations are effects. And so in that spirit, I can say that most of the things that we think about as inanimate, on some scale, like the carpet is not conscious, but the molecules, the atoms, and the subatomic particles that comprise the carpet are in fact quite adaptable, and the existence of the carpet itself is a demonstration of that adaptability. And so it is ultimately all objects revert to one field of subjective awareness, which is Shiva himself. In which case, resting in pure subjective awareness, it is necessary for us, each of us, to take responsibility for our own tensions and not to project them elsewhere, but to settle ourselves within ourselves, and unfolding our own energetic mechanism, merge ourselves into the most refined dimension of existence that is available to us. Ultimately, it is subjective awareness that is the ground of all of this display. And how can it be said ever that the Lord has not revealed himself? The Lord has clearly revealed himself in the nature, in the form of every experience that that happens. He goes on to say, you are dominant in worldly objects. Absolutely. In the various sense organs. And even when I'm enlightened with knowledge, and when I am enlightened with knowledge, even while you permeate all these things, you are beyond them. May I have that revelation at all times. Those who proceed on the path of beholding you are fortunate to have your blessing. How can they be reborn, and how can they be known by anyone? They are decorated with the naturally glorious symbol. You lift them up again and again from ordinary things in their ordinary life, from water and grass and from other things, and you fill them with waves of nectar. Amen. Satiated with nectar flowing from the direct realization of your form, having eradicated desire, intoxicated, they wander about at their will. It is nectar. It is the bliss that resides. I mean, and I described it earlier as that simple good feeling. Because, I mean, we can put a whole bunch of drama on it. This, ecstasy, yada, yada. But it's the simple good feeling that is available to you anytime you turn your attention to even as simple as what it feels like to breathe. What's it feel like to breathe? Thank God. Well, having a cold is like, being in worldly life. Because all of the pressures and the stresses and, our inhibitions, imposed upon your capacity to simply breathe. In the natural world, I mean, our ancestors, and this is particularly true of sadhus in India, could just go in the woods. I mean, not that the woods are a safe place, mind you. They're definitely not safe. But you could go in the woods and get every kind of everything you needed to survive as a person. And sadhus could go in the woods and build a hut because, all the land wasn't owned by somebody. They could build a hut and go through their day gathering plants and fruits, and live. And it wasn't, apart from the natural dangers of, lions and tigers and bears, oh my. It was a simple life in which breath was completely accessible. It's in this modern world with all this modern propaganda, conditioning, that we develop the illusion, we come up with the idea that we need to do this and have that and be something else, and instead of simply training ourselves to be ourself. And then whatever flows out of us is a creative expression of us, and it is beauty. Just like a couple of times this week, I've been down to the garden, and it's beautiful. It looks beautiful. And as that beauty, just in the simple beauty on the ground, starts to come up and expand a little bit, now it's gone into, we're starting to go into food processing and storage, and we've got other forms of creativity to engage in, all of which is focused very simply on the loving desire to support each other. And how fantastic. It's not about, me getting anything or you getting anything. It's not about getting anything. It's about, promoting life, to promote life. Bravo. Neither then or always, nor even once, where there is no perception of time exists, that very thing is your realization, and it can neither be called eternal nor anything else. This profound source presence that we exist in and also we exist as, in its core, is beyond all frequency. Because frequency, whether it be on the smallest subatomic level or the galactic or cosmic scale, frequency, is time. And everything is a whole mishmash. What we are, we're like an accretion of a whole lot of different frequencies that have mutually adapted themselves to one another to facilitate the functioning of the colony of cells that we are an expression of. Our ultimate source, the source of this seething cauldron, which is the essence of the cosmos and everything in it, that source is beyond time, beyond any frequency. And yet, and here's the paradox, while it is beyond frequency, it still has some rhythm to it. It's not a dead or immobile, unmoving anything. There is no such thing as anywhere where there is not movement, however profoundly subtle. With my heart pining for your vision, may I only attain this much power through yoga, that by merely wishing it, I may gain entrance into the innermost sanctuary to perform your worship. Which simply it means the innermost sanctuary is where? In our hearts. May our practice of yoga bring us only the power not to manipulate our world in any way, not to do this or heal that or fix something else, but may it bring us only the power to dissolve the shell around our hearts and enter into deeply the sweetness that all of you have experienced within yourself and know to be there when you are in your best. To bring us to that sweetness that we can focus on the ultimate revelation and be established in contact, alignment, and flow, total union with the ultimate reality, which we are anyway, always. But in this instance, we are experiencing the sweetness of that contact and the vastness of its scope, which is even beyond time. And worship, remember, worship has one meaning, which is, of course, those of us who grew up in one church or another, often, I know I do, I have a little bit of allergy to the word worship. I also have an allergy to the use of the word God. And I'm not thrilled about the word Lord, which is constantly in here too, because, of course, that in some way suggests that there's somebody out there that is my boss. So all these words bother me just like they bother you. But because I have a lot of respect for Utpaladeva and actually a lot of amazement in Utpaladeva, I, you know, allow him to say it however he wants to say it. And he's saying it in a cultural milieu in which this is perfectly appropriate. And it is acknowledging a certain kind of power. To that end, I want to say one other thing, and that is when we talk about, Lord or God or any of these words, there is in our society and our culture a whole notion that somehow, and this is the craziness of our culture in these days, we have income inequality on a scale that we have never seen it on the face of the earth. And yet, we have people who are constantly demanding that all power between people should be distributed evenly, or, it's injurious. When in fact, there is no relationship on the face of the earth that ever occurs in a power neutral environment, or even a power equal environment. The whole purpose of relationship is to distribute power, to move it from, my simplest analogy is, how does the wind blow? How does the wind blow? Energy accumulates in the form of a high pressure system, and it builds up to the degree that it starts to, as it accumulates, low pressure systems are formed by the process of accumulation, which then, comes to a point where it overflows, and the wind happens, and the energy is distributed from high pressure to low pressure. And this process in the atmosphere is constantly being driven by the sun and the moon. In the same fashion that the tides are happening. The tides are happening based on the distribution of energy that is, driven by the sun and the moon and the rotation of the earth. This happens. And while personally I am appalled by the inequities of, our culture and the ways in which we have promoted those inequities in the world. Because, now even in India, the Indians are trying to be more American than we are. That's unsettling because, one of the things that most attracted me to India was that India was this last living place on earth where people had a living culture that had existed for thousands and potentially tens of thousands of years, or at least the culture of India, like in 1972, was, it was still the culture that had accumulated in India for tens of thousands of years was still available to connect to. That's all changed by now. And that traditional culture, which was rooted in the seasons and the change of climate and the movements, the shifting of the earth on its axis and its rotation, and the changes in the location of the sun and the moon, the seasons, the plants that came in the seasons, the moments that, for working in the field, and the moments that were for resting, and the moments that were for going in the jungle and gathering medicines and medicinal plants and food. All of this, you could go to India and you could sit down someplace and take your food, which was grown right around you onto a banana leaf and eat it with your fingers. And there was something about that experience that like cut through all of the intellectual bullshit and the propaganda that was, just overwhelming in America, and just connect to the simple good feeling that, that culture existed to promote. Not entirely, because, India had its own hierarchies. The problem with hierarchies is hierarchies are inevitable. And I'm sorry to say that because, I'm perfectly interested in non-hierarchical organization and community, and I've never been good at creating hierarchies. Hierarchies happen because of the 80-20 rule. 20% of the people are always going to do 80% of the work, and that makes hierarchies inevitable. With my heart pining for your vision, I only attain this much power through yoga, that merely by wishing it I may gain entrance into the innermost sanctuary to perform your worship. And that wish, merely by wishing it, that wish is I deeply wish to grow. I deeply wish to grow. That is the first step, the first movement toward, internally rotating your mind, which dissolves the whole structure of desire within us and begins to facilitate a connection to a deeper place in us through our trauma and our tensions, to be in contact, to experience, connect to, cultivate that sacredness that is our innermost sanctuary, and begin to expand that innermost sanctuary and its sacredness and its simple good feeling to the degree that that space informs our mind, it informs our nervous system, it becomes our perspective, and we begin to see the whole world for what it actually is. The relentless interplay and adaptation of the vibrancy of our own deepest inner self. With minds blossomed from attaining an unwavering vision of you, the actions and the words of devotees are naturally flawless, because rooted in respect for everything, our words speak relentlessly to oneness, and for that reason cause no fracture, no strain, no trauma. There is no flaw. O Lord, may my permanent abode be at your feet. And may I be fearless. Whatever my station in the world, may I be fearless. Whatever my station in the world, may I worship you with actions unrestricted. May everything I do be an expression of the joy that I feel in the connection that I have with my own deepest inner source, and may it express the respect that I hold in my heart for all of this extraordinary diversity which manifests itself as separate and different, even though it is never anything other than the vibrancy of supreme awareness itself. Having completely entered into your lotus feet, having lost all desires, let me consume the most bounteous honey and wander about at will, completely satisfied. Even for him whose thought of worshiping you arises only hypocritically, inevitably he acquires the appropriate closeness to you. I think here we will stop. Thanks for being here, everybody.